What makes a fantastic duo? What about a D&D party? What makes the relationships and dynamics interesting and engaging? If you watched my last video, you can probably guess what the answer is. Contrast. Let me start by going on a bit of a tangent. Trust me, this is all very relevant. Stories aren't perfect mirrors of real life. If they were, they'd be long and boring. Instead, we distill them like concentrated fruit juice, extra flavor in a smaller package. Rather than juggling 10 characters and confusing the reader, we condense their most important traits into just a few. Take what you need, leave out the rest. Now, archetypes do not have to be cliche or predictable. In fact, it's best to create your own original, unexpected archetypes. For more on creating an interesting individual character, you may want to watch my previous video, The Foundation of a Character, Self-Contradiction. But what we're talking about here is how to write interesting character dynamics. What you get when you condense and dramatize certain personality traits is a set of very distinct, contrasting characters. Not only does this help readers to differentiate between characters by making each character memorable in their own unique way, but it creates conflict. Considering that conflict is at the heart of every story, it is essential that characters are not clones of each other. Let's test this idea with an experiment. Two versions of the same story. One has a similar characters, the other total opposites. Let's see which one keeps you hooked. The snowstorm stole any sense of time that Joan may have had. It felt like he'd been carving his way through the ever-deepening snow for days, and he could feel it in his extremities. Frostbite would soon be a very painful reality. But as he emerged from the tree line, he came upon a miracle, a cabin, and through the tiny window was the orange flickering light of a fire. Joan ignored any sense of caution he may have had on a normal excursion through the woods and ran as fast as he could to the door. He knocked twice and entered without waiting for a response. Inside the cabin, a woman, maybe his age, knelt by the wood stove, stirring the fire. She turned at the noise, startled, before quickly recovering. "Oh, hi," she said. "Didn't expect company." She gave him a polite but wary smile. "You okay?" "Sorry for barging in," Joan said, shaking off his coat. "I got caught in the storm. My name's Joan." "Jan," she said, shifting to make room. "Glad you found shelter. You must be freezing. There's a kettle on. Want some tea?" "Yes, please. Didn't think it'd snow this late in spring." "Right? I was about to pack up, but I didn't want to hike out in this." She passed him a steaming mug. "So, what brings you out here?" "Backpacking. I try to get out when I can. You?" Jan smiled. "Same. It's nice being off the grid." "Yeah," Joan agreed, nodding. "Really peaceful." Jan sipped her tea, looking into the fire. "Yeah." The silence stretched. "So," Joan said, shifting, "how'd you get into it? Backpacking, I mean." Jan smiled faintly. "Oh, my friend was into it. I invited me on a trip once, but she bailed, so I went alone." Joan blinked. "Wait, that's exactly how I got into it." "Really?" Jan laughed. "That's funny." "Yeah," Joan chuckled awkwardly. Another silence. Outside, the wind howled. So what's wrong with this scene? It's realistic, but it's forgettable. There's no tension, no contrast, just two polite people making small talk. And there's no compelling hook. Why keep reading? This version demonstrates why similar characters can feel dull. There's no push and pull to keep the interaction dynamic. Now compare that to this. The premise is the same, but the character he meets has a few differences. The snowstorm stole any sense of time, etc., etc. He goes in the cabin. There's a woman, maybe his age, crouched by the wood stove stirring the fire. Her jacket was patched, her boots well worn, and her hands were rough from work. She glanced up at him, unfazed. "Hey, stranger," she said in a lazy southern drawl. "You always walk into people's houses uninvited, or is today just special?" Joan froze. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I just..." She let out a sharp laugh. "Relax. Ain't gonna shoot you or nothing. Sit down before you fall over." Joan hesitated, but did as he was told, stretching his hands toward the heat. "I... Thanks. I got lost in the storm." "Yeah, no kiddin'." She tossed him a blanket. "Name's Kinna." "Joan," he said, still catching his breath. Kinna sized him up, her head tilting like she was trying to figure him out. "You don't look like the type to brave a snowstorm for fun." Joan sighed. "Yeah, guess I was dumb enough to forget to check the weather." Kinna snorted. "Figures. City guy?" Town, actually, he corrected. I work at the hospital. Kenna raised a brow. Ooh-wee. So what's a hospital man doing out here, chasing enlightenment? Joan rolled his eyes. No, backpacking. Kenna grinned. Fancy boots, brand new pack, you a weekend warrior? Joan bristled. I actually go out a lot. Uh-huh, Kenna smirked. Bet you even filter your water, huh? Joan narrowed his eyes. Are you saying you don't? Kenna just laughed, standing to pour tea. Damn, this is gonna be fun. So why does this work? At least better than the previous one. Kenna challenges Joan. She's playful, sarcastic, and rough around the edges, while he's reserved and straight-laced. The dynamic has tension. Joan has something to prove, and Kenna has her own way of doing things. It creates curiosity. The reader wants to know, how are these two going to get along? Now, their differences fuel the interaction instead of stalling it. So, for the final comparison, Joan and Jan are pleasant but forgettable. They're two similar characters with no real tension. Whereas Joan and Kenna are engaging and dynamic. Their contrast drives the conversation, making it interesting. So, some key takeaways are that contrast creates natural tension, even in friendly interactions. Similar characters can feel redundant. Distinct characters keep dialogue fresh. And thirdly, characters don't need to argue, but they should push each other in some way. For every character we create, they all have one motivation in common that takes priority over everything else, and that is to compel the reader to keep turning the page. Our characters want to stay alive. They want their story to be heard, and it is our job to make sure that happens. I think I've made my case. If you agree, I hope you'll carry this into your own stories. If you disagree, well, I'd be interested to hear why. I'm sure there are tons of exceptions and counter-arguments. Feel free to open up a discussion in the comments section. So now that we see how contrast brings characters to life, let's break down how to actually create that contrast in your own characters. So what kind of contrasts work best? Here are some tried and true ways to create memorable character dynamics. So one of my favorites is values, or morality. So a few examples are universalism versus power, self-direction versus security, stimulation and hedonism versus conformity and tradition, benevolence versus achievement. And I didn't come up with these real character alignments. Check out the link in the description below to learn more. So some other contrasting aspects in characters that can create potential conflict are age, wealth, geographical origin, culture, career, Jing. If you've ever watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, there's positive, neutral, and negative Jing. Political beliefs, philosophy, religion. The list goes on and on. One guilty pleasure of mine is listening to the Critical Failures audiobooks, written by Robert Bevan and narrated by Jonathan Sleep. The series is full of grim and disgusting humor, but despite the immature premises for many of the stories, the character interactions are where this series shines the most. There's Cooper, the half-orc barbarian. He's rude, crude, and very unintelligent, and yet he probably has the purest heart and the best intentions of all of them. Then there's Tim, the intelligent, alcoholic, halfling rogue, with no sense of morality beyond his own self-interest. There are a great many other characters as well, but I'll just stop at these two, to keep things simple. Cooper and Tim get themselves into all kinds of trouble. Cooper unintentionally offends people with his gross habits, like passing gas at inopportune times, and Tim gets caught up in it. Tim has to use his intelligence to get them out. Other times, Tim gets them into trouble with his greed, short temper, and lack of regard for rules. Cooper has to drag him out using brute force and sheer luck. It's a great dynamic, and it works so well because Tim and Cooper contrast with each other in spectacular ways. So, if there's one thing to remember, contrast isn't just about conflict. It's about creating characters who feel real, challenge each other, and keep your story alive. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please like, subscribe, and click on the bell to get notifications for new videos.